It's with some reluctance I come to the floor today to continue the discussions that were begun this morning about the Intelligence Committee's report that comes out today. It's called Phase 2. I'm somewhat embarrassed to have to highlight the partisan divisions and really sloppy work of the Intelligence Committee that was discussed here. Back in July of 2004, the Intelligence Committee completed an exhaustive two-year study of the inadequacies of the intelligence pre-Iraq War. We looked at it. We had hundreds of interviews, brought people in, looked at all of the documents. Our staff analyzed all of these items and interviewed people. And we came to the conclusion that despite what some people had said, the intelligence prior to the Iraq War was flawed. It wasn't a question of the administration pressuring analysts or the administration misusing intelligence. Those charges were made, and they were very volatile, and they were all dismissed because the intelligence was bad. And we passed the bill out of committee unanimously. It was a true bipartisan work. And it stands, I think, as a monument to what effective oversight could and should be. And it helped reform the intelligence community to make it better, to improve the tradecraft of the analysts, to inspire more working together. But today, we have regressed significantly. What came out today as the Phase 2 reports were regrettably highly partisan. When I became vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I had hopes that we would be able to put behind us the corrosive atmosphere of partisanship that had taken over in the committee in previous years. I recommended that we work together on Phase 2 to bring it to an end, because most of the work had been done in 2006. The minority asked for extensive analysis and collation and collaboration, and they prepared that. But the offer was rejected by the chairman. Instead, two reports were written solely by Democratic staffers. No minority staffers participated in the writing of the report. They were shut out, unlike work on the Phase 1 effort. And it's an unfortunate example of partisanship alive and well on the committee. The report released today is an attempt by my friends on the other side of the aisle to score election year points. I would have thought we would have quit fighting the 2004 election, but apparently we haven't. It violates the committee's nonpartisan principles and rejects the conclusions unanimously reached in previous reports. I think it's ironic that the majority would knowingly distort and misrepresent the committee's prior Phase 1 findings in an effort to prove that the administration distorted and mischaracterized intelligence. In contrast, as I said earlier, the Phase 1 report of July 2004 concluded that most of the key judgments in that NIE, National Intelligence Estimate, on Iraq's WMD programs either overstated or were not supported by the underlying intelligence. And the committee found that the Intelligence Committee failed to explain to policymakers the uncertainties behind the judgments. The report made it clear that flawed intelligence, not administration deception, was the basis for policymakers' statements and decisions. Despite the Democrats' political theater on the floor today, none of the facts in the Phase 2 majority reports released today change that conclusion. There is no evidence in the information brought up today that changes the conclusions of the Phase 1 bipartisan 15-0 vote. Now, the reports that came out today ignore the fact that many in Congress, Republicans and Democrats, examined the same intelligence as the Bush administration, and they too characterized Iraq as a growing and dangerous threat to the United States. Their public record is replete with examples of statements by the current chairman and by other Democrats. October 10, 2002, there is, quote, "There is unmistakable evidence that Saddam Hussein is working aggressively to develop nuclear weapons and will likely have nuclear weapons within the next 5 years. He could have it earlier if he's able to obtain fissile materials on the outside market, which is possible. Difficult, but possible." We also should remember we have always underestimated the progress that Saddam Hussein has been able to make in the development of weapons of mass destruction. He also said on that date, Saddam Hussein represents a grave threat to the United States. Further on in the statement, he said on October 10, 2002, "The President has rightly called Saddam Hussein's efforts to develop weapons of mass destruction a grave and gathering threat to Americans. The global community has tried but has failed to address that threat over the past decade. I have come to the inescapable conclusion that the threat posed to America by Saddam's weapons of mass destruction is so serious that despite the risks, and we should not minimize the risk, we must authorize the President to take the necessary steps to deal with that threat. There's been some debate over how imminent a threat Iraq poses. I do believe Iraq poses an imminent threat. I also believe after September 11, that question is increasingly outdated. It is in the nature of these weapons that he has and the way they are targeted against civilian populations that documented capability and demonstrated intent may be the only warning we get. To insist on further evidence, we could put some of our fellow Americans at risk. Can we afford to take that chance? I do not think we can." Close quotes. Those were the statements he made on the floor, and frankly, I concurred with him. I said many of the same things because he was looking at the same intelligence that I was and the majority of this body was looking at and that the executive branch was looking at when they made the distinction. We decided it was to support the President to move forward. The intelligence was often flawed, but that was the intelligence we had at the time. Now, the report today was drafted entirely by the majority. The minority was entirely cut out of the process. And even with a majority-only drafted report that twists the statements of policymaker and cherry-picks the intelligence, the report essentially validates what we've been saying for years, that the intelligence was flawed. Number two, the statements report excludes intelligence, including instances in which the committee knew the policymaker's statements were fact-checked and approved by the IC. They cite the statements made by Secretary of State Powell, despite the fact that the IC had drafted the statement and reviewed it. The majority didn't even seek to interview those who they accused of making unsubstantiated statements. And finally, there's a second report on Rome. This was totally outside the scope of the committee's authorization. The committee said that we will look at the Office of Special Plans and the PTAG in the Defense Department with reference to Iraq. The report they put out today has nothing to do with Iraq. It's about an Iranian talking about Iran, and the people who were talking to were not members of the Office of Special Plans or the PTAG. It was not an intelligence operation. The United States had been contacted by somebody who wanted to speak to someone other than the CIA about information he had in Iran. It was found not to be trustworthy or useful, and the National Security Advisor dismissed it and said it requires no further proceeding. We wasted time, we wasted valuable effort, and we got nothing for it. Mr. President, I regret to say that this has injected partisan politics and does this committee and this body no useful purpose. I yield the floor.